Now what's going on? It's your boy CJ Goodfellow. We back with the boxing clinic, talking that real boxing shit. And I was on a thread and I've been seeing a lot of people that act like UFC is the Don Dada of motherfucking combat sports. And I respect the hustle of the UFC. I like the format that they got going on, to be honest, with one belt. And politics haven't yet took over the UFC, and hopefully they won't. For the sake of their sport. Somehow McGregor Mayweather, is some barometer or some proving grounds to see which sport is better, but which combat sport is better, which I think is pretty stupid from the simple fact that he's fighting in a boxing ring. Now UFC has some delusional ass fans, just like boxing do. Terrible motherfucking fans. They ain't really got to the hardcore, purist type of fans. They probably got some hardcore fans, but not the purists. But look at the numbers. People say, well, boxing is dead, boxing is this. But at the end of the day, numbers don't lie. And I looked at the pay-per-view numbers. I don't know if they're 100% official, because UFC is never coming out with their pay-per-view buys. But I've counted only 6 times that UFC has reached over 1 million pay-per-view buys. The highest pay-per-view buys was 1.6 with McGregor versus Nate Diaz. I think it was the second one. I can't remember. And I think all of the ones that did over 1 million pay-per-views included Ronda Rousey or Conor McGregor, and there was one that didn't include them, I believe. And if a woman was most famously or famous or top 2 or 3 famous athletes of your sport, power to you. You bringing the women power over to you. And, but she proved to be not what you guys thought she was, tried to build her up to be, and got her ass whooped by former boxer Holly Holmes. Now, it's no ill will towards UFC, and they act like, they shit don't stake and they sport is so much better. But a lot of guys in the UFC or in the mixed martial arts world used to be boxers, used to want to be boxers. I think Anderson Silva tried to be a boxer, and it didn't go out too well for him, according to his record from what I've seen. They even had some WWE guys in there. And, Brock Lesnar, who couldn't stay clean. You got, Conor McGregor, a guy that came out of nowhere and, did his things. John Jones, who I like. Don Cormier, who I like. Pretty good guys. I don't watch a lot of UFC. Just not for me. I don't like the rubbing, the wrestling, the rubbing, the ground holding. It just, I can go see that shit on the streets. I never was a fan of wrestling, in high school. I stopped watching WWE when I found out it wasn't real. So I'm not a fan of that, and I'm not trying to show any bias, towards it. But at the end of the day, UFC is fairly a young sport. I think it kicks off, their first pay-per-view was around 2001. So, it's hard to say, but, as far as the fanfare and the marketing ability, they definitely are the new kids on the block that's starting to make some noise. They got the EA Sports contract. They don't even make boxing no more. And a lot of people are getting away from the boxing thing and say it's dead, it's old school, this is that, and that. And there's a lot of UFC movies popping up. But at the end of the day, man, doesn't the numbers matter? Who's bringing home the bigger purses? I think, you look at a pay-per-view card, a lot of the co-features, make more money than the main features of UFC pay-per-views. I think Conor McGregor's highest payday is like $9 million from a pay-per-view event or some shit like that. That's really chump change compared to Floyd and Manny Pacquiao. That is. But 9's a good number. For their biggest pay-per-view bout doing 1.6. You can't lie. Manny Pacquiao made $10 million fighting on ESPN without a pay-per-view. So you look at that, and he's on the latter end of his career. A lot of the guys in boxing, they're very well paid. 1 or 2 fights a year, and they good. They paid. You don't have to, worry about them scrapping up for money and begging for dates like UFC. And in UFC, they act like, I've seen a guy, only can name Mayweather. And at the end of the day, UFC, how many big stars do you got? How many millionaires does the UFC have walking around? At the end of the day, don't nobody go in combat sports to fight for free. They in there for a check. And how many millionaires does the UFC have walking around? Absolutely none. Absolutely very few. You know, McGregor, Rousey maybe, John Jones maybe, Don Cormier, I guess. You know, these guys are regular guys that probably got to have another job on the side. You know, and to me, they say, you know, UFC is for guys that can't box. I agree. I got to agree. Who couldn't cut it in boxing? Why would you want to do UFC and make chump change when you could be a boxer and make big money? You know, a lot of them guys can cut it in boxing, you know? And that's just to keep it real and keep it 100. You know, and it is what it is on that end. I'm not knocking them as an athlete, you know. Train, get your money, but at the end of the day, numbers don't lie. Boxing pulls in bigger numbers. We do a pay-per-view. Canelo Alvarez, Chavez Jr. did 1 million pay-per-view. How? Chavez Jr., you know, coming off, you know, horrible performances, and they still did 1 million. You know, you look over there in Wembley Stadium, you know, they had 90,000 fans in Wembley Stadium to watch an old 41-year-old Vladimir Klitschko take on Anthony Joshua, who's young in the division. Where's UFC going around the world pulling these numbers, filling up 90,000? Could they fill up Dallas Stadium? Perhaps so, in the right fight. But you know, Joshua and Klitschko is not two of the biggest stars in boxing, and they pulled 90,000. Neither one of those guys were on the pound for pound list at the time. And I'm pretty sure, you know, Rousey and McGregor were pretty much pound for pound fighters most of the time on their list, one of the best fighters in their sport they had to offer. So imagine what our top fighters are doing. 4.6 pay-per-view buys between our two fighters, Mayweather and Pacquiao. You know, Mayweather what? 4.0 with Canelo Alvarez. So the numbers don't lie. UFC is catching up. They coming. They doing their thing. But at the end of the day, is it a fad, a blip, or is it going to be? Are they going to be able to train, or are they here to stay? And only politics will determine that. If they keep the sport going on with one belt, and you know, keep the system they got going there now, I think that sport is here to stay. To be honest, boxing got to get their shit together. You know, all that not fighting the best shit. In UFC, you getting consistent battles of them fighting the best. They fighting on free TV, fighting on Spike with reality shows. It's time for boxing to kind of catch up to that and try to follow that format. But you know, UFC still little brother. That's just the way it is. But they coming though. We gone.